Welcome to episode 108 of the XrmToolCast. In this episode, Scott and I talk to ourselves. It's just us. We don't have a guest, but it's great. We talk about Mario. We talk about ACDC. We also talk about the Canadian Power Platform Summit that's coming up here soon in a month. Talk about all those things. And then the second half of the episode, we take a deep dive into some really, really geeky, technical IOC dependency injection stuff. So if that's not your cup of tea, feel free to just leave after that, but stay for the first half. First half definitely is as technical and definitely is much more consumable from that standpoint. So sorry we haven't been on lately. Primarily it's been a lack of guests. So if you have a guest you'd like to suggest, or yourself even, please let us know. But with that, sit back, relax, and let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the XrmToolCast. With me, your host, Daryl, always racing the bar, and my co-host, Scott. I'm still tired. Scott, how's it going?
Very good, thanks, Daryl. Yes, I'm still on Central European time, I think. Having got back from Oslo, the beautiful, beautiful Oslo. I'm not sure actually when I landed. I think I've had one sleep since the land, or maybe two sleeps. So yeah. My body is just kind of, gradually getting back into this time zone. But it was an amazing time. It really was. Because before that I was in New York as well. So I've been somewhat of a, haven't really touched the ground yet. But it was at the ACDC. I was at the ACDC hackathon.
Yep.
And did you see the pictures of me?
No, did I missing out on it? Pictures, I usually like to see it.
Looking kind of ridiculous. So I dressed up as Mario. So I was a judge, right?
Oh, and that's what that was all about.
Alongside the amazing other judges. And the idea was that we all came from like different backgrounds and had different focuses of different technologies. So Sarah Lagerquist was there as well, and she did the keynote with me, and I was dressed as Mario, and she was dressed as Princess Peach. Oh. And so we did the whole pro code, no code unite thing, but with a little bit more of a moved on from where we did it at Scottish Summit, which was back in 2019, I think, which was more of a kind of like an us and them. And we were trying to explain that, we needed to work together because the Microsoft marketing message was all about low code. And that was obviously creating some tension. So we were trying to bring things together, but we got it really wrong, because by talking about a fight, basically people were coming along expecting some kind of cage fight.
They came there like fight sort of attitude, rather than unite. Okay,
exactly. And so they weren't having any of this unite thing. They were just like, no, we just want to fight. So this time we took it a little bit different, and we were talking about like you can power up from both sides. You can power up low code using pro code and power up pro code using low code, and that was very much of the flavor of the whole hackathon as well. So it was really about trying to bring all the different parts of Power Platform as well as all the different parts of the pro code ecosystem, and so people using Azure services and people were doing some really quite complicated pro code,
I'm sure,
solutions. It was a lot of AI, right? Obviously, because everything's about AI these days. And there was sort of like everyone was doing these like machine vision, AI, image recognition. So there was one team with recognizing bananas, and they had a camera fitted to the car, and they were driving along, and they trained their vision model on detecting bananas on the road. So the idea was like, yeah, exactly, like kind of
this
Mario.
Is like Mario Kart, then, huh?
Exactly, because that was the theme.
Beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, the theme was Mario, right? And it was a bit of a tenuous link, but so their business case was like, this could be something like Elon Musk would watch out Elon Musk, and he could like build this into all the Teslas. Like, I mean, they also had this idea of like they could sell stickers, banana stickers, and you could slap it on anything you didn't want any Teslas to crash into. It's like I'll slap a big have a big sticker of a banana. Please don't run me over.
It's kind of like what's it called when the mob extortion? It's like extortion, right? Like if you don't put our banana on your car, you're going to get hit. So you better do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's that was their business case, I think. Yeah. But yeah, there was people using Copilot Studio to create bots that did all sorts of crazy things, and lots of games being built. So the team from Itera, actually, so our good friends Ulrika and Nick from the Boost podcast, actually, they were on separate teams, and they were actually competing against each other. But interestingly, they both were doing very, very game orientated solutions. So Nick's team, they created like a solution where they was using AI to generate levels of a game, and like the sprites and the maps and things like this, which was super cool. And then Ulrika's game it was actually multiple games. They were all in their team. They were all building lots of different games, and they had like Power Pages, a game, and then you could go and select other games to play, and which were built in Canvas apps. And yes, and the winning team was from Innovation Norway. They were called Nintendo DS, which is quite cool. Silly play on the words. And they built this like this end-to-end. It was amazing, actually. It was like an end-to-end system where they were using AI to look at plans of an apartment where you would plan where you wanted your bathroom and to go in all the different pieces of plumbing, like, the bath and the toilet, a shower. And then they'd use AI to recognize all those different components and then work out the best route for pipes. And then they'd estimate based on that how much copper piping you would need. And then they would send that estimate through to get approved and get ordered. So it was like this whole end-to-end business system, all based around plumbing. Obviously, Mario, right? There was
plumbing. The plumber. All right.
Yeah. And they were the winners. They did some really, but it was so difficult. So judging, it was so difficult to kind of do because all these teams had so many cool solutions. And the idea was we had like these different badges that we were awarding, and it was so intense because we had to award badges, and you get a certain number of points per badge, and that was done at the end of the day. And so throughout the day, people were doing blog posts, and we can put in the show notes, actually, because you can see the site where all the blog posts from all the different solutions. And so people were like doing a blog post, and they were trying to claim these badges. And so as judges, we had to constantly meet and look at these blog posts and decided if they were going to get the badge. And then we'd sometimes go to them and say, well, look, you're close, but maybe you could do this. And then you'll get the blog post, then you'll get the badge. And then we had 4 categories that we were ranking them in throughout the whole 3 days. And at the end of the day, we'd have the leaderboard and see where everyone was. And it was like, close. And then each day it would change. It was like, who was in pole position. And then obviously by the last third day, it was the person that came up top. And actually on the site, you can see, we can put this in the show notes as well. There is a Power BI dashboard because, so we had a hack within a hack. We built amongst the judges, we built our own system based on the Power Platform. It was Canvas apps and model-driven apps and Power BI. We built a system to manage all the points. And so I created like a drag and drop application. Of course, it was drag and drop, and so we could kind of rank the different categories for each teams. And then Sarah actually kind of built a Canvas app. It was a custom page and model-driven app for awarding badges, and Victoria did a Power BI dashboard, which, as you can see, it's so pretty, like on the website. We were close to awarding ourselves the winners, actually. We thought might have been a bit of a conflict of interest there.
Well, you probably wouldn't be asked to do it again if that's your opening.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm not sure if I'll be asked to do it again anyway. But yeah, it was super fun. It really was.
Yeah. Well, the funny part is I dressed up as Mario last month. We had a dinner murder mystery party that we did.
Oh yeah.
My wife bought something on Amazon, and it was like murder at the pizzeria or something. And I was my backstory was that I was a plumber. And I needed to wear like overalls, blue overalls, and a red hat, and had a mustache. I'm like, this is really weird. I've never done a murder mystery before. I'm like, is this like important? Like the person that killed the person has a mustache. Like, so I shaved everything just so I had just the mustache.
Wow,
And
that's commitment.
So I went ahead. Well, it's kind of fun to have an excuse. You're like, why do you look so weird? Well, because I had to. Just to remind yourself why you let things grow, I guess. But anyway, so I get dressed up, and then I start actually reading through the part, like when I get to the murder mystery area, and I'm like, oh, I am Mario. I'm like Mario, like legit Mario. Like I'm my parents were race car drivers, and I was a part race car driver, but now I'm a plumber, and I was working on a mushroom infestation underneath the sink. Like it was crazy. It was like, oh, I would have, because I didn't have a red hat, so I went and grabbed one that said like Fred. It just said Fred. I was like, that's a plumber hat. It just says Fred on top. And so I would have gone a little more. But when I got dressed up in my outfit, my son came to me. He's like, Dad, can you just do this one time and jump up one time? I was like, sure. So I did the old Mario jump up and hit the block sort of idea.
Yeah.
So
You have the sound effects as well.
Yep.
So at what point did it dawn on you that you were Mario? It was like the penny drops.
When it started saying I spent a lot of time in my brother Luigi's haunted mansion, I think that was when it was kind of a
and then you were like,
giveaway.
Right, now it all makes sense. Yeah,
yes. And I had to talk in an accent the whole time. Like I was supposed to talk in an Italian accent the whole time. So it was funny. Anyway, it was
well,
crazy.
we had that episode previously, didn't we? We were talking about Italian.
And we learned that this actually means you have no idea what you're talking about when you hold your hand and your fingers together. Like,
yeah.
You have no idea what you're talking about. Yes.
I love the fact that actually it took you until you were talking about Luigi's Mansion to realize that you were actually like, it'd be like obvious to everybody else around. It's like, you're dressed like Mario, but like, no, you just thought you were just some random plumber, which happened to have.
And a plumber, the red shirt and blue overalls. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all similarities to real characters, or pictures, purely coincidental.
Yes, that's the tagline to that one. So,
kind of copyright type issues, but yeah. Well, you're talking about mushrooms, and there was because I was at the AI tour in New York, and I did a Copilot Studio breakout session, and I was blown away. It was so popular, so many people there. And I was talking about using Copilot Studio with generative AI for generative answers. And so actually there was a lot of people using generative AI, generative answers in Copilot Studio and pointing it at things like the Mario wiki and things like that. So you could ask Copilot for what are the different power-ups did and information about Princess Peach and Mushroom Kingdom and about Bowser and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, you just pointed at Mario wiki and then you suddenly got this Copilot that is literally an expert in everything to do with Mario. It's so cool.
Oh, that's funny.
But yeah, so then I did actually I was at Itera and I did a pro code workshop where I was it kind of felt like I was sort of trying to persuade people that Power Platform is something that you can use alongside pro code. I think generally there's a lot of people who perhaps think of Power Platform as being like an all or nothing thing, right? It's like, okay, you go, I'm going to use the Power Platform now, which means no, you can't use pro code and Azure and all those things. So I was trying to position it a little bit in the sense that, well, yeah, actually you can use Power Platform alongside all the other stuff you do and then even extend it using that as well. So I showed I had like a solution that had TypeScript to create web resources and TypeScript to create PCF and C# to create plugins and the metadata obviously in that solution. And you just like do a .NET build, right? And it just builds the whole thing. And so you can see everything as code and like Canvas apps in there as well with your PowerFX in the YAML. And so, yeah, I think there was a few kind of, penny drops at that point, people going, actually, yeah, okay, right. So it's not just we have to use Dataverse, because that was a lot of the misconceptions. I think it's like, okay, well, if you're going to use Power Platform, you have to use Dataverse, and what else do you might be using Dataverse for? Some of the lifecycle management side of things and pipelines, and obviously the metadata and solution deployment. But you don't necessarily need to use Dataverse for everything. You can interact with Azure. So yeah, when I showed like using how you can create C# plugins and stuff, but I saw that you'd been doing something around C# plugins, and you've submitted a session for the Canadian Power Platform Summit,
yes,
which has been
yes.
accepted. Congratulations! Yeah, I mean, yeah. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So you started this whole tirade with mushrooms. You never got to the point of why mushrooms were involved. But did I miss it, or because I was expecting some great
yeah,
transition.
I was going to say why mushrooms involved. Yeah, so Sarah actually built. She built some mushrooms. She crocheted some mushrooms.
Oh.
They were so cute. I think hopefully there's some pictures of them on social media. They were so cute. And so these little crochets, because like mushrooms, like the power-ups, right? And have you seen the Mario movie?
No, I haven't. My kids love it though. I have to.
Oh yeah, you really need to see I can't believe you've not seen the Mario movie. You have to see it. It's one of those movies that is like funny on multiple different levels, and it's got like Jack Black as he plays Bowser.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Just so cool. Anyway, and one of the scenes, like Princess Peach is ramming these mushrooms down Mario's throat because he says he doesn't like them, but of course they're the power-ups, right? And they give him these big, and so. Sarah, she crocheted, and we had like the competition. People answered a certain thing. We were throwing them out into the audience. So that's why I was going to talk about the mushrooms, because you mentioned mushrooms in your murder mystery thing.
There we go.
So there we go. That was the point of mushrooms.
That was the point of the mushrooms. Speaking of mushrooms, 15 minutes later, we got to the mushroom part.
Yes, exactly.
Wanted to make sure, because the rest of our audience would be wondering, like, what happened here?
I'm glad we got that cleared up now.
Now that we got that cleared up, yes. Yes, the Canadian Power Platform Summit. So we better give a big plug for this first before we go into individual aspects of it. But
absolutely, yeah.
So it's going to be in Vancouver. It's going to be over March 15th, right? Is it one day? So there's 2 days. There's the 15th.
It's one day. It's on the Saturday. 16th. Yeah, on the 16th. I
thought there was something on the 15th too, workshops or something on the 15th, and then
there were going to be some workshops, but
they change it. Okay.
Yeah, we kind of figured this is the first time we've done this event, so we thought let's just focus on the Saturday, and then maybe next year we'll kind of we'll level up.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the idea is brilliant. Hey, we have the world's largest concentration of MVPs happening just across the border. Let's see if they will just drive a little bit farther north. And so, yes, so I was like, hey, I can go do that. I haven't been to Vancouver and British Columbia before, so I will go up and do that. So it is the 16th. The ticket is a grand total of $25, and that's mostly just to pay for your lunch and some refreshments. But really, it's mostly to make sure you show up. Because even if you charge like $1, like people will actually show, they won't sign up unless they actually are planning to go, which then makes you not end up with 300 box lunches that no one will eat because everybody signed up without attending. So anyway, it is $25, and yes, and that you're basically paying for your own lunch, so it's basically free in that aspect, but it is $25. And yes, so first of all, we hope everyone that is anywhere near the area, or heck, it's worth driving to. There'll be so much going on and so many great speakers there. Yeah, it would be worth the trip to Canada, that's for sure. So anyway, yes, so that's going on. So the session that I submitted is one that I've done before, and it's really just going through like, what have I learned in the last decade of writing plugins on the CRM Dataverse Power Platform, model-driven apps platform, right? And it's just it's so many times you walk into new projects where people, they don't know any better because no one has taught them anything, and they go online, they read the documentation, they copy a pasta from the plugin, and that's the plugin they use, and they create 15 more, and they copy pasta that too, and there's all this stuff. Yeah, you're making me hungry. It's okay. I'm gonna go out to eat tonight anyways. So, so that's primarily what it is, and what I've gone on before. So making sure that you're logging every single organization request that's happening from your plugin. That's always nice. Being able to log your context. What's your target? What's your pre-image? What's your post-image? Being able to see that. Even being able to limit your log, because out of the box, it's 8,000 character limit for for your plugin. So if you're writing your trace log just to the standard trace log, you'll cut off your log. So you want to actually, ideally you want the beginning and the end. The middle isn't quite as important usually. So, having something to manage that for you. All that stuff you want to have just wrapped up and be done and not have to worry about it. Being able to grab your service, you don't want to have to be writing the same code every single time. So that's the basics of it.
And you use your own plugin base class all the time in your own projects. So it's like,
yes,
proven.
It's open source. It's open source as a source only project. So you can see all the code that's going on in there. If you don't like something, you can hand edit it. And then if I make a change in the future, it'll do a diff and say, hey, do you want to, you can manually move those over or not. It's designed for you to be able to extend it. So, hopefully you don't need to do that. And you can always submit a PR, and I would definitely do my best to approve it if it makes sense. So far, I haven't not approved somebody's except for this week.
Well, there's a challenge.
Yes.
I feel as though there's a challenge for me, actually, there.
Submit something so bad, I'm not even going to accept it. Is that what it is?
Daryl says no.
No. Okay. So, yes. So that's been something that I've done and will continue to use going forward. Now, the part that's brand new to this, and the part that has been the biggest change in me in developing plugins since probably I've started. I mean, it's been along, and we talked about it before, but it's just how do you do inversion of control? How do you do injection into your plugin? So
I'll just stop you there.
Yeah.
Some people may not know what inversion of control.
Most people don't, and even some people that think they do. It's always good getting a refresher of it. So yes, let's start with that. The plugin itself is already set up with a iService provider. That's like the only thing you really get. And then you pull everything out of that you need. Now, the thing that doesn't get you, it doesn't give you the way to, it only allows you to be able to pull stuff out. It doesn't allow you to be able to define how do you create things. How do you say, hey, for this interface, I want to use this thing. Like, it doesn't do any of that stuff. All it's doing is providing a method. Hey, you want this type? I will attempt to give you this type. If I can't give it to you, I'll give null back. That's just the out of the box iService provider.
Yeah.
That's how we get the iOrization service factory. That's how we get the plugin context. Like you get all this stuff out of this provider thing, right? And it would be nice. It is nice to be able to have your own inversion of control features so that you could define your own things in there. So, for example, on my current side projects I'm on, they have 3 different ways that they're bringing contacts into the system. And these contacts are owned by sales reps. And these sales reps, all they have is this code from an external system that they want to use and match into CRM, but they don't have the actual CRM GUID or anything else. They just want to say, hey, throw a code at me, a string at me, and I want you to go find the appropriate sales rep and associate it to the record. Originally, we did this as alternate keys, which was great. Mm-hmm. So I put alternate key in system user table, and then I would just say, all right, give me the code, and then I will assign that based on the alternate key, which works great until it doesn't, right? So if the user doesn't exist in CRM, then it just fails, and your import fails. And that's bad, right? You don't want your import to fail. And so I had to write a plugin and say, okay, when it's coming in, let's go manually look it up. If it doesn't exist, let's assign it to a doesn't exist user. If they didn't provide one, let's assign it to a not provided one. That way they'd be able to kind of troubleshoot and see what's going on in the integration, and they everything would at least bring in, even if it wasn't assigned to the correct person. And they'd still have the code there so they could go manually go and update it if they wanted to later once that person was valid. So I've got these 3 different ways it's coming in. Each one is being handled by a different service, different plugin from being able to handle this stuff. So I got the same logic I need to use 3 different times. How do I go through and create it? So how do I go through and wrap that into one place and reuse it? And so I created a contact service, for a better name, where you would just say, hey, here is the, actually it's a sales rep service. Here's the, actually no, it's a contact service. Here's the code that I want you to go look up the owner for, go and find it, and then and create the contact if it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, great. Just do all this stuff, right? Prevent from getting duplicates in there. That's always fun too, in your integration. If you're running solely in CRM or solely in Dataverse, how do you keep from getting duplicate imports coming in and creating duplicate records, right? Without an alternate key. Alternate key is fine; it solves it for you, but then it blows the actually insert for the integration, so you don't really want to do that either. So anyway, I created this service, and it's fairly easy to create a service, right? You just define a new class, but let's say it has some dependencies on some things. I need a plugin context. I need this. I need that. I need I don't know what organizational service. I need some settings to use. Maybe there's certain things that you need, right? And so what you're forced to do then is, ideally, if you're following kind of the more of the ASP.NET Azure function sort of approach with the dependency framework in .NET 6 and .NET Core or whatever, is you define everything you need in your constructor. Hey, I need these 3 interfaces, and then have it build it out for you through your inversion of control or your dependency framework, whatever it is that's doing that. And so what I did is I just defined one method actually first I defined my own version of control framework thing, modeled very, very closely after the dependency framework that's found in .NET Core. So it looks very familiar, but it is specifically designed for plugins, in that it's super easy to make sure that you are keeping your plugin execution context separate from any other plugin execution context going on. And by default, you fall into that pit of success, right? And then other things that, like, in a pure sense, in the standard way of doing it, you have to define every single thing you want to use. Well, if I have a single class and I don't care that it's not true that we're not actually, everything has to be an interface and injectable, like I just want to define a class and use it, I can do that. Later on, when this needs to be interface, I can go through and inject that later. But so it'll automatically handle that for you without having to register it.
So why is it called inversion of control? Because, like, what you've described there is constructors with interfaces and services being passed into those classes as they need them, and then those classes then use that service to do whatever it needs. In your case, like looking up, contacts. So, why is it called IOC and dependency injection? Those 2 phrases, what do they mean?
Pretty much interchangeable in my mind, and I have a hard time. I myself have a hard time pulling that out. But the inversion of control would be the logic that determines how something is performed is not defined by the thing that's actually using it. If that makes sense. You're injecting from the caller, hey, this is the logic I want you to use, based on your definition of what you want to use at like a top level. So it removes any dependencies or anything else. So let's say you have a calculator that needs to go through and calculate taxes for, I'll use US, all 50 states, right? So you would say, hey, calculate, give me my calculator, give me my taxes. Give me whatever I owe for my taxes. Well, the calculator would either have to have a method for every single state and have a switch statement or if statement in there and say, hey, what's your state? Okay, let me go ahead and get that. Yeah. Or the calculator could accept a state tax calculator thing. You inject it in there, and then it does whatever it needs to grabbing your W-2 information, all your tax-related information, and then it would give that to the state-specific calculator, and that state-specific calculator would actually be doing the calculating. So the thing that's actually consuming the logic isn't the thing that's deciding what that logic is.
Yeah,
so that's like the inversion of control. It's different. It's opposite.
I think a good example I find useful to think about is actually in ASP.NET. You mentioned it, right? Because it uses IOC very, very extensively. In fact, like everything in an MVC is done that way. And a really good example I think about is authentication, because you have so many different types of authentication, and there are different authentication providers depending on how your setup is. And so you can just simply define using ASP.NET which authentication provider you're going to use, but the actual authentication service, the actual interface, is the same across all those different providers. And so as far as the actual execution is concerned, it's just using the authentication provider looks the same. Doesn't matter if you're using OAuth or integrated authentication or SQL or nothing, it's going to be the same thing. And
Or
so that's
optical image recognition signed document provider. That'd be great.
yeah. If you want to, yeah, go for it. But also, I found that another benefit of it is that when you create tests, you then don't have to have a concrete implementation of that interface. You can just have a mocked interface, a mocked version of that. So when you create your test, you just create your instance of the class that you're testing, and then you pass in a mocked version of your authentication provider, or in your case, your contact provider or whatever it was.
Yep.
And then you say, okay, when you ask for something, give a predictable response. Don't go off and do whatever it needs to do in Dataverse. Just simply give this, and then you've got a very controlled execution scenario.
Yep. You've gone from the what to the why, right?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
To why? Why do you want to use it? Why is it useful? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that interface, that concept of using interfaces, but then it suddenly becomes really practical. Because when you learn about object-oriented programming, you get told, oh, you got to use interfaces and all that kind of stuff. And then they went out of fashion for a while. And everyone was like, why are we using interfaces when we could? And then suddenly it all kind of fell into place with the inversion of control. It's like, actually now, well, it makes a lot of sense to do it because you can. It's a simple way of building out software. But so tell me through it then. So because one of the things about a plugin is that you've got, when you tell Dataverse, okay, I've registered my plugin, you give it the class, and then it manages the instances of that class. Because there's that gotcha, isn't that? That old gotcha is that actually, the instances of a plugin can be shared between executions from, and so you need to make sure that you don't hold any state of your plugin inside that plugin instance, because it may be used at somewhere else. And so when it calls the execute, it passes in the service provider, which contains the context and contains the iOrganization service provider and all those sort of things. And then you've now got a function that you're executing with that service provider. So how do you hook up your IOC service provider along to sort of fit in with that Dataverse IOC? Because that's the thing about it, right? Dataverse is doing an IOC already. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it's using. It's injecting the service provider and the organization factory and the logging provider and all those kind of things as interfaces. And that's why we can test our plugin classes, because we can create mock versions of those. So how do you kind of fit how do you register those additional services?
Yeah. So the IOC container has to do two things. It has to define what it is you want to create, and has to define the lifetime of what it is that you're creating, or the scope of what you're creating. And that's what this question is how do we ensure that if I create this one service, that it doesn't all of a sudden get an iOrganization service from another plugin execution context that's running under a different security context? Like, how do we keep those things separate, right? And so if you are doing the standard .NET dependency framework, the ways to register things are singletons, transient, and then scoped. And scoped is just saying, hey, within this one context, I'm going to have a completely separate collection of interfaces, collection of services, collection of objects. And so that's exactly how I solve the problem in the plugin-based class, is when it goes to, it's going to be the thing that actually implements the execute. And in the execute, it has a container where you've defined how, just on the actual constructor of the, actually it's done lazily, so it can be done as it can be overridden later. But anyway, it'll go and grab a container which defines all your registrations. I want this to be created this way. I want this to be created that way. Like iOrganization service, right? You have to know, well, what do you want to run it as a system admin? Do you want to run it as this? Do you want to run it as that? So you choose, okay, when I ask for iOrganization service, I want you to create it this way. And then, so it defines that. But then when the actual execute runs, it just creates a new scope, and it creates a service provider with that scope. And so you pass in the service provider that's given to you, and it'll use that as the backup, or as the backup if it doesn't, if you haven't defined it already. So it'll get the iOrganization service factory for you and everything else through the standard one, but it's wrapping that one basically. And then so then it creates it in scope. So that way, when you register things, almost everything you want to register, and by default it will be so, is scoped. So that way, when you create your new instance of whatever and you pass in iOrganization service, it's only going to be created once for that plugin execution context, even if it's required by multiple things or requested multiple times, it only creates that one instance because we define it as scoped and we are operating within a scope. So that's how we keep things from stepping on each other.
And where do you put all that registering of the scopes, instances, and all that kind of stuff? Where do you put that code?
So so what I normally do is I normally create a static extension method. I guess all extension methods are static, but an extension method on the container that says, "Hey, register plugin services, register default plugin services," right? And then I call that from the actual plugin itself. And then in the actual when it goes to create a container, it goes to say, all right, I'll go and create the container. I will go and call this overrideable method to get these things, and you can override it and replace if you want to, or just extend onto that and add whatever other overrides you need to, and replace anything you need to for that specific plugin if you want to. But then in the unit test, then again, you get to do that again, is you get to override whatever that one is with whatever you want to use for your unit test. So that way you can actually use an end memory. You can use Xrm unit test framework instead of an actual real live organization service or whatever. So
yeah. It's because that what you've just described there. It's funny because whenever I've taught people about dependency injection and IOC, it's always like you say it and they're like, yeah, and so that's what I do anyway, right? It's a kind of a logical way of programming and creating dependencies between different services because it allows you to factor out different functionality into different classes and with different interfaces, like you say, services that do different things. And that's as soon as that you get that leap and you start thinking about actually you can make services out of anything. Everything becomes a service because it performs some operation for you, but you don't know the actual implementation of that. It's the classic creating an interface. And when you describe this to people, it's like, well, yeah, that obviously it's just that everyone sort of does it slightly differently. So what you've done is you've created a standard way of registering that and a way of making that work within a plugins so that it doesn't actually cause problems, cause the scoping problem where you've got, it's not going to be thread safe and all of those challenges.
Yep. That's exactly what it is. And you want to take a guess at how many lines of code it takes for the whole shebang, everything.
I bet you it's not many, actually. I mean, I bet you it's not many lines of code because really all you're doing is factoring out a pattern, a very simple pattern into. So let me guess. Okay, you're asking me to guess. Do I get a prize?
You get all my love.
I thought I already had all your love, Daryl.
Not yet.
You're telling me now that I haven't
very
got it all.
conditional.
Okay, I'm going to guess. Right. Okay. It depends on how you formatted your code there. So you might be like
keep in mind that I do have in my interface alone for the container. So I have add scoped, I have add singleton and add transient, and you can have 3 different methods of that. And I have commenting in there as well. So like add scoped as a generic, add scoped as a generic where you pass in a factory method to go create the thing. And I have add scoped where you just say, this interface is this implementation. You don't do anything else. It handles everything else for you. So I've got, let alone in that class itself, I've got 79 lines of code just in the interface class itself.
Right. What you're just doing, what you're prepping me for here is the fact that you've built very verbose code.
Well, yeah. This is not one line of code. Okay. This is like,
no.
I want it to, because it's code that you can see. It's not compiled and given to you. It's actually stuff that you can see and look at. I have to make it as pretty as I can.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, yes.
No, I was going to go for the 400 lines, 400, 500 lines of code. That was going to be my sort of guesstimate.
Yeah. And you're almost spot on. So the container logic that defines like the registrations and all that stuff is just under 300 lines of code. And then the thing that goes through and actually does the work of giving you the actual provided code is only about 250 lines of code. And then there's a couple other supporting classes that are probably 200 lines of code. So it's about 700-ish lines of code.
Okay. So a little bit, I was a little bit under in my estimation, but do I get your love though? I mean,
no, you've lost it no, sure. You have my love.
Oh no. Oh dear. I have to really work at this.
Anyway.
if I constantly plug it and praise your plugin, extensions for everyone, maybe you'll just make up for it.
Yes.
But I think that once you've got those kind of, I think a common challenge, and I've had the same problem. I've had the same challenge when I'm thinking about building something. You always get that feeling of like, oh, I don't need somebody else's base class. I'll just use my own. I'll just use. But I think, and quite often when you look at these projects and you see there are sort of hundreds of thousands of, it's like huge numbers of lines of code, right? You do worry, well, what am I doing here? I'm just building in a whole ton of code. Actually, I was having this conversation with someone, I think it was Sarah actually, about Canvas components, right, in Power Apps. So, one of the things you can do is you can factor out user interface into Canvas components, and they're low code components. But then the risk is that what happens is that those components start to become more and more bloated with functionality and like different bells and whistles and like cool bits of graphics, and you may not be using them. You may actually just be using the basic, and then you're like, wow, well, and now I've got all this stuff that's in my app, and then it's going to mean that it's not as performant and all those sort of things. So there is that in your back of your mind. It's like, well, if I'm going to use someone else's base class, how much of this stuff do I not need? And how much of this stuff can I just, now I suppose with the C# compiler, it's going forward, it's going to start sort of like trimming stuff, isn't it? That's the thing. I think one of the optimizations it will be doing in .NET 8. But
can't
at the
moment,
public
methods though, right? It's got to be private methods that aren't being used, right? Or internal method.
Yeah, I think I was reading that actually .NET 8, when the compilation process, it actually trims out it does tree shaking, kind of like classic TypeScript tree shaking, where it just like gets rid of everything it doesn't need. Even if you like, your link libraries, it just goes, okay, I'm not using them, I'll just trim them out. So, but I mean, what would you be saying against that? Like, well, why would I use your class if I don't need it all?
I am perfectly happy with you copying and pasting my code.
I knew you were going to say that. I'm not forcing you to use it.
No, go right ahead. Use something. If you want to write your own, you can. You're much better off taking something that already exists, that if you can understand it, and extending it if you want to. But ideally, yeah. So the one error, PR that I had that actually did not accept came from someone that actually was already working with the IOC code. They had a test framework that they were using, and the iService provider in the test framework was not returning null. It wasn't returning null if it wasn't found.
Right.
And so it was error. I think it was throwing an error.
Right.
So he had given me the service, and it was throwing an error. And that's not how the out of the box version is documented as working in Dataverse. And so that's the assumption I have, is that it returns null. And if it returns null, then I go and attempt to create it. So the instance was a lazy instance of a class, right? So there are times, I found out there are times where you can have codependencies of services. Like, hey, I need this, and I need A needs B, but B needs A. And you kind of run into some issues with that, trying to new this thing up, because you got to walk the whole tree, the whole inheritance tree, to create every single object to go create this thing. And if one needs the other, then you're going to get into a circular reference dependency, which I do I at least throw an error. I catch that. You hose your plugin. I do throw an error and stop that from happening. But that was one thing I ran into. And so the simple way that I could come up with was just to make them lazy. And so I can create your new instance. And then when you actually go and access it, then it actually goes and, well, I've already created the instance A. Now I'm going to get B lazily. A already exists, so I can go and access it that way. So that was the simple way around it. And then I was like, well, I don't want to go through and register lazy every single time. I want this thing. Oh, I also want it to be lazy. And this version lazy. If you know how to create it, service provider, you can create it lazily. Go ahead and create me a lazy version.
Presumably you don't allow singleton registrations. You only allow scoped.
No, I do allow it, but you really have to explicitly ask for it.
Because like a singleton registration wouldn't really be a singleton registration, would it? Because you can't because you'd have multiple sandboxes running, and you'd have multiple different instances that are going to not actually create a single instance of that class. I'm
trying to think how that works, but I'm pretty sure that I do attempt to I mean, it's not a singleton in that it won't be across other plugins, but it should be across that single plugin registration the way that the Dataverse works. So it will be a singleton across the multiple executions of that plugin.
Even if they're running on different sandbox instances.
No, well, no, not in that sense. On the same instance.
Well,
yes.
Obviously not.
Well, obviously not. Come on, Scott. I'm not God or anything. Come on.
Surely a singleton means like a single one,
well,
right?
That's a global singleton, like universal singleton, not like in my code context, my app domain.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So you could use that for like caching, I guess. That would be a good sort of use of that. I mean, just that on its own, I think is an incredibly powerful pattern that people could benefit from there off the bat. If you're doing stuff that you don't, you do every single time your plugin executes, but actually it's the same every time, then you've got a singleton. I suppose there is always challenges, aren't there, about clearing the cache. That's always I've found that problem. It's like, okay, how do you now get rid of that singleton? How do you?
It's age-old problem, cache validation.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the singletons that I do register is the plugin unsecure and secure config. Because that is a singleton for that plugin. And whenever you update it, CRM is happy enough to go and create a new instance of your plugin class. Thereby now I have a new singleton and I'm good to go. So that is one of the few actual singletons that I do. Because if you need a service that needs to see what's in the unsecure config, what's in the secure config, you can't have a constructor just with a string and say, give me a string. Well, that's going to be really, really bad. So you have to create I CRM configuration strings or whatever you want to call it, and then create an instance of it and populate it that way. So that's the way.
I've used the unsecure config as a way of invalidating cache, because like if you update that, then you can enforce your singletons to get recreated. It sounds cool. It sounds very cool. And so have we now just given everything away for your Canadian our platform? Something? Can we just get another speaker now? Because and just redirect people to this.
Something tells me that I have not adequately explained it in words in a way that being done visually will not far surpass.
Just demo it. Yeah, just show me.
Actually, I think this one actually I don't do anything in Visual Studio. I think it's all in PowerPoint slides, just with pictures of what it looks like, because it's just that's really quite unusual for you, because you're normally there rolling your sleeves up and kind of creating code and stuff. Plug in with testing in an hour. Let's do this puppy. It doesn't need it. It doesn't need it. And I'd very easily get lost in my story, right? So if you're going to give speaking, you want to give a story. I'm going from A to B to C to D. If I just opened up Visual Studio and had nowhere to go from, I'd be like, what do I do? I'm not quite sure. I forgot to show this.
I forgot to show that. That's the worst when you're giving a presentation. You open up so this is I have to admit something, and this is terrible, but because I do so much stuff, I can't believe I'm even going to admit this. So. No, I'm not going to admit it now. I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Oh, come on. Confess.
Only if you give me your love now. Only if you
feel.
You're going to give, if you say that, all your love, then I'm fine. But yeah, so, when you're doing TypeScript, I do TypeScript all the time, and then I'm switching to C#, and I'm constantly switching back and forwards between C# and TypeScript. And sometimes I will just get I don't know, and my brain will just go, you know what? I don't know which comes first, the variable type declaration or the name. And when you're typing, and then suddenly you stop typing, and your brain's like, no, I'm not telling you. That's it. I'm not giving that away. And then I have to just sort of step away and meditate for a couple of seconds, and then it was like, oh, all right, then I'll tell you.
I mean, that's funny too, because for being so long in C#, and being like, it probably is the same way you actually have a spoken language. Like, I am not fluent in Spanish. I took 4 years or 2 years in college and 2 years in high school. So it was a encrypted language, right? Okay, I know this is this in English. So I know this is this in English. It wasn't I thought in it, or I thought, and so the longest time, C# was C#, and every other language I went in is like, oh, well, to do that in C#, I do it this way. In order to do it in that language, I do it that way. And TypeScript's the first language that's like superseded it. I'm like, okay, I do. Oh, wait, no, this is C#. I can't do it that. Like, you start thinking that way. And first time I ran into dang it, why doesn't C# support this? It would be so much easier if it was TypeScript. Like, it's the first time that's I've had that issue, I guess. So yeah, it's kind of funny.
You just need conversions of everything just to be, the same language. TypeScript just seems to be so much more prevalent though now these days. Everything is, even if you're writing user interface extensions and stuff, even you write it in TypeScript, and so I think there's probably more TypeScript being written around Power Platform. Now, of course, we've got a special guest coming on from Microsoft to talk about low-code plugins.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that immensely. We're recording that next week, I think, right? Yes.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And so that will be interesting because we'll, to contrast all the geeking out that we've just done about C#.
It's been heavily geeked out, yes.
Yeah, we'll talk about. We probably lost most people now, and we're just geeking out on our own.
That's fine. I'm having a good time. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. But we're talking about low-code plugins, so Power Effects, and sort of contrasting that. So that'll be super cool. But I haven't given you any homework, so I do need to give you. Because
am I technically the guest this time? I should have had you introduce me.
But I'm going to give you some homework, so I don't care if you're the guest.
Okay. All right.
So when you use Pack plugin inside the Power Platform CLI, right? that creates your project. What there needs to be some way of doing that same scaffolding for your base class, so that it creates that plugin project with you, with all the registers, all the NuGet package registrations, and then it will then pre-populate some. Maybe ask you, okay, well, which plugins do you want to create? How do you want to actually, what services do you want to register? So it kind of creates an easy way of getting started. Because I think when you get a little bit of code, it makes it clearer to how you move forwards from there. So there you go. There's my.
But I basically already did that.
I'm not going to do that.
I basically already did that, though.
Well, great. Well, fantastic.
The Visual Studio Solution Accelerator in the XRM Toolbox. You go in and,
so does it allow you to register your IOC?
So I haven't gone back and seen what it will do. It uses I have an example project that I have, and it's supposed to go ahead and just download that and utilize that. I haven't had to go through and seen how that works with what I've got. I think it'll work. I don't know. I have to go check it. But I mean, I've got that mostly already done. I just need to go through and verify that it is pulling the right version and and that it will work going forward. So, but yes, so that part was basically already done.
It needs to use the new NuGet package simplified project stuff, so that you can use .NET Build against it and stuff like that.
Yep. If old Daryl knows did what he thinks new Daryl thought he should, then old Daryl was grabbing everything from his examples plugin and just grabbing that and using that to inject everything. So if new Daryl knows what old Daryl thinks he knows of new Daryl is correct, then yes, it works. But I probably need to go test
it. Okay, let's move on from that then. I didn't follow what you were saying, but I did follow your IOC stuff, so it does sound very cool.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely encourage everyone to check that out, and we'll put all the links in the show notes. So we've been geeking out for a long time, but yes, I think it's going to be interesting to see how C# against the Power Effects plugins moves forward. So looking forward to next episode.
Yes, me too. So I guess if we're gonna, wrap this up, if our listeners didn't really like how geeky we got, maybe they could suggest some new topics for us by contacting us. And how would they get a hold of us, Scott?
That wasn't forced at all. That was perfectly natural.
I sleep well at night.
Yes. So yes, you can email us, cast@xrmtoolbox.com, and on socials @XrmToolCast. And yeah, absolutely, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know on a geek scale of 1 to 10, how geeky we were in this episode, and how you'd actually prefer how much geeky read night people can be like. Can we just, if that was 10, can we have
give us
one?
the plus or minus and how geeky you want it? I mean, this was 10 times, so negative 10. Way too geek. No, it was give me even more geek. Give me a 10. Yeah, that'd be great. I like that, the sliding scale.
That's right. And you've got any suggestions for guests as well? Let us know, because we're always looking for interesting people to talk to.
Yeah. Yep. And that's been the primary reason we haven't met, is because we either just haven't quite found things that fit and are interesting, and as well as the holidays that took a bite of our free time as well. So those combined, it was kind of a perfect storm. So anyway, hopefully we get back in the swing of things. So
absolutely. Back in the saddle.
Back in the saddle. Scott, it's great talking to you again. Looking forward to seeing you in another month and a half here. Yeah, we'll be actually.
Yeah, it's going to come around really quickly. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll let's do an episode around that time as well. So sort of, let everyone know what's going on, because we obviously can't talk about MVP Summit because that's all be under NDA. But we can talk about all the cool stuff that's going on at Canadian Platform Summit.
Yeah, and when I'm there for the Microsoft Summit, you can go use your blue badge to go give me freebies that aren't available to the other attendees.
Yeah, all the sodas from the fridges behind the.
They pulled those out, and so not everyone can get them, so it's not quite as big of a deal. But for like 1 year, it was like, dude, who's got a blue badge? I want a drink.
Yes.
Give me some caffeinated sparkling water or whatever it was they had back there. I don't know. Anyway, Scott, good talking to you. We've reached our time limit.
Likewise. Yeah.
Have a good
Until
one.
next time. Cheers then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been the XrmToolCast with Daryl and Scott Darrell. Produced by Lynn Zawin. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to cast@xrmtoolbox.com, tweet @XrmToolCast, or hit us up on our LinkedIn XrmToolCast page.